everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be starting to make some blocks for the Kittens Quilt pattern by Elizabeth Hartman. I'm going to be making the cat sampler quilt, as you can see here. These are all the pieces of fabric that I need, and I'm going to be showing you all the fabric that I picked out personally for this quilt. I mostly chose neutrals for my color scheme, but I do have this one fun printed fabric here as well. The reason I mostly chose neutrals is because I'm modeling this quilt after a real life cat, so I wanted it to match the colors of the cat and the markings. So that's why I went with this color scheme, and it's going to be modeled after a calico cat for the owner that I am gifting it to. So here are all of my fabrics all laid out, and I can start the cutting process. So I'm going to be first cutting my fabric for the daisy block, which is the pattern that you see here. I'm going to also be using my Quilt for some of the pieces to make the cutting process go a bit quicker and making sure that my cuts are as accurate as they can be. So as you can see, here are some of those blocks cut out with my Quilt, but I did also have to cut some by hand here as well, so I sped up this process for you to watch. This is the most tedious part for me. Here's what my pieces look all cut out and labeled and are ready to sew. The first part is going to be creating the ears, so I'm showing you the pattern instructions here, and I'm going to be on step 1 using the image in figure 1 to help me begin. Here are the pieces that I'm going to be needing for this step, and I'm going to be creating the ears, so I'm going to be needing to do a lot of diagonal seams. In order to create diagonal seams, I'm going to place the good sides of the fabric together, use my mini ruler here to draw a straight line from corner to corner in a diagonal. I'm going to clip my fabric together just to make sure it doesn't move around when I take it to the sewing machine. And when I get to the sewing machine, all I'm going to do is sew directly on that line that I created. And here I am showing you the presser foot that I'm going to be using. I'm going to be using a straight stitch presser foot. And here I am just sewing along that line and what that looks like. After sewing my diagonal seam, I'm going to cut alongside that seam 1/4 away from the stitches. Once that fabric is cut off, I'm going to open up my fabric so it lays flat, press open the seam using my fingers, and then gently iron that seam so it stays open. And here's what that looks like all complete. So I have one ear complete, and I just repeat that process for the other ear. Now I'm moving on to part 2, which is creating the nose. So as you can see here, I'm on step 2 of the instructions and going to be making the illustration that you see in figure 2. So I'm gathering all of the pieces that I need here, and here I am making my diagonal seams. So I'm marking my black piece of fabric with a white color pencil, using that diagonal as I did with making the ears, clipping that in place, and repeating that with the other piece that I need. As you see here, I'm clipping that in place as well, making it a mirrored image of the first piece that I did. Once I got those both marked and clipped, I will take those to the sewing machine and sew along my diagonal line. Here's what that looks like after it has been sewn. After sewing, I'm going to repeat that same process of cutting off the edge of my diagonal seam 1/4 away from the stitches for both of the pieces, and then folding my fabric out so it lays flat, pressing those seams open with my fingers and giving it a light ironing. After ironing both of those pieces, you can see what they look like next to each other if I line them up roughly. And in the next step, I'm going to be combining these two pieces together in order to create the whole nose piece. So lining those up to the best of my ability, clipping the edges, and then taking to my sewing machine where I'll be switching out my presser foot for the 1/4 inch presser foot. And now I'm sewing along that line using a 1/4 seam allowance, and here is what that looks like all complete. After that is sewn, I'm repeating my same seam pressing process where I gently iron the seam open. My seams don't line up quite perfectly, but it is pretty close, so I definitely call that a win. The last portion needed to complete the nose piece is to create some more diagonal seams using the background color fabric to start carving out the actual shape of the face. You're probably sick of watching me create diagonal seams at this part of the process. Quilt making involves a lot of repetitiveness when you're putting together a block, so I apologize for that, but it can be pretty therapeutic piecing everything together and knowing what's coming up next. So here's what those seams look like after I have sewn them together, again to start carving out the shape of the face. Going through the ironing process once again, getting those pieces laid out as flat as possible. And once I have that all done, here's what that looks like. And I think I did pretty well. So now I have the nose and the ears all complete. Now I'm on to part 3, which is creating the eyes, which correlates to step 4 in the instruction pamphlet, and you can see in figure 4 in the illustration how I'm going to be piecing this portion of the block together. After pinning these two pieces together, I can take it over to my sewing machine and sew a normal 1/4 seam allowance along the right edge. This is how that looks. After thoroughly pressing, I can add my third piece to this row and attach it using a clip. After clipping together, I can once again take this portion of the piece to the sewing machine and sew another 1/4 seam allowance on the edge. I iron that flat and I've got the middle portion of this piece all complete. Now I'm attaching the top piece of fabric to that middle portion using my clips and taking it to the sewing machine, sewing my 1/4 seam allowance. Again, really repetitive process as you can see here, but I am happy to be taking a break from making those diagonal seams. So I'm pressing that all out and I have one more portion to add to the bottom of this piece now. After sewing on this remaining piece, you can see how this entire portion looks sewn together, and that is the left eye all complete. Now I'm just going to repeat this exact same process for the right eye inside of the face. Here's how those two pieces look all complete. So the two eyes, the nose, and the ears. So we're moving along quite nicely here. I'm not done with creating my diagonal seams yet. In step 6, I have to sew on pieces M to the eye portion using my diagonal seams to start carving out that portion of the face as well. So you get to see me repeat my diagonal seam process for these two white squares, attaching them each in a mirrored image to both of the eye blocks. Now I'm sewing that diagonal seam along the line that I have drawn for both of those pieces. After sewing those diagonal seams, I once again cut off the portion of the seam 1/4 away from the stitches for both of the eye pieces here, iron out my seams flat, and once I do that for all pieces, you can see how those look when it's all complete. I think it came out really nice and starts to really shape out the face. Now is the time when things are starting to come together, and I'm attaching the white middle portion to both of the eye blocks as you see here. I'm clipping those together, making sure it's all aligned, sewing my 1/4 seam allowance, and once again taking it to my handy iron, ironing my seam flat, and you can see how it's all starting to come together. For that one portion, I'm going to repeat the process for the right eye block, same as I did for the left eye block. Pinning that on, right sides of the fabric facing together, making sure everything is in place and not going to move around. Sewing my 1/4 seam, taking that to my iron, pressing those seams with my fingers, then gently ironing, and now I can see how the whole middle portion of the block is starting to look, and I think it's looking really nice. The last thing to do is combine all of the remaining sections to the middle portion. Here I am clipping on the ears to the top of the eye block, sewing my 1/4 seam, pressing out that seam with my iron, and you can see how that's starting to look. So cute. Now I get to add the nose portion here as well. Making sure I line this up. This part came out a little larger than my other portions, so I had to kind of move things around to get it aligned quite right. Now I'm pressing out that seam, and you can see this is the block all complete. Here's what it looks like on the back and on the front. I hope you all enjoyed the process of putting together this daisy block for the Kittens pattern with me. I can't wait to share how all the blocks come out once I have them completed. If you make this block yourself, I'd love to see it. But until next time, I hope you have a great day and keep creating.